got him on the air. We were close a couple of times, but I don't believe, unless you will refresh my memory, Guardsy, that Clint Hill ever was a guest in the Bumper to Bumper program. And I'm sorry about that, because I look back and think that would have been, that's one of those interviews that we didn't quite get to for whatever the reason.
I don't think we've ever had him on. I believe he's been on with our good buddy Christopher Gabriel.
Yes, he has.
Over the years.
In fact, he, I think, retweeted a link to that conversation as well. I might do the same later. Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent who, of course, famously ended up on the back of President John Kennedy's limo on that fateful occasion, November 22, 1963, after the president was shot, has passed away at the age of 93 years old. He apparently died Friday. I think today was the first announcement that I was aware of. Maybe it was over the weekend. In any case, he died at his home in Belvedere, California. No cause of death was indeed given. He in later years appeared often, gave many speaking engagements, wrote several books, and ultimately, I think, has sort of become almost synonymous with that date in history. And there was one occasion, this is in 1975, this was shortly after he had retired from his job, from the Secret Service, at the age of 43 years old, in which he opened up in a way that he really hadn't until then, and I'm not sure has all that often since, even though he has certainly talked around it and occasionally talked about it very emotionally. And it was an interview with Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes. We're going to play it's about a minute.
It's about 30 seconds.
30 seconds, and is this just his response to...
It includes the question.
Okay, it includes the question from Mike, and a very tortured answer from an individual who, you can tell, never stopped being tortured by what took place on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas.
Was there anything that the Secret Service or that Clint Hill could have done to keep that from happening?
Clint Hill, yes.
Clint Hill, yes? What do you mean?
If he had reacted about 0.5 of a second faster, or maybe a second faster, I wouldn't be here today.
You mean you would have gotten there and you would have taken the shot?
The third shot, yes, sir.
Third shot was, of course, quite lethal. And imagine being haunted by that specter, by that thought. And, you know, Secret Service job is well known. Our job is to take a bullet, if necessary, for the individual or individuals that we are indeed guarding. And whether he could have made a difference if he'd reacted sooner or not, we will never know. He climbed up in the back in large measure because Jackie Kennedy started climbing towards outside the vehicle, towards the back of the vehicle herself. At which point, and technically, I think Clint Hill's job that day was to protect her. That's how specific they get in these plans and these designations. And he wanted her to get back down into the vehicle for fear that she could be putting herself in danger as well. And one of the grisly details that he has talked about before is that part of why he thought she was leaving, climbing out of the limo was to a certain extent, was to grab a piece of the head of John F. Kennedy that had obviously ended up elsewhere in the just outside the seat area of the vehicle as well. It's hard to imagine completely ever getting past that, right? If that's your job is to protect the president, and no matter whose fault it is, whether it's even fair to blame yourself or not, how many times do you play that in your head? I assume you have to see a therapist about that because you can't if you play it on a loop in your head, you can't go on, right? So you have to find ways to compartmentalize it. You have to find ways to cope with it. But he became sort of one of the historical faces of that event, who lived much, survived many of the others that we obviously associate with the said event, correct?
I can't imagine the guilt. Obviously, you heard it. That was 12 years later, that interview.
Yes.
Something like that it still affected him over a decade later. And I'm sure he had to live with it pretty much every day. But what's always struck me about that guilt is I assume, been to the book suppository, right? Or at least been around it.
The depository? Yeah, I think I've said this before. My desk at the Dallas Morning News back then was a corner desk that literally looked directly on the Texas Book Depository. From the other side, basically, from the other angle. But so I saw it every day.
And you can go tour it, and AJ and I did it.
Yes, I did.
When the Final Four was there, 2014. And you can go up to the floor where Lee Harvey Oswald was and basically go to the spot where he hid. And you sit there and you go, how is this ever possible? I mean, they had no chance. They had no chance with how direct the shot was.
Weren't you amazed at how close it was?
That's what I mean.
It wasn't like, this is like one of those 1 in a million shots. You're going, no.
Right.
This is a shot a lot of people could make, unfortunately.
Easily. And everybody knew the route the president was taking because obviously people were there to see him.
Correct.
And a million things changed. It was the 60s. Open air car, the whole bit. But you stand up there and you go, that's how easy it was for someone to take out our president? Like, 6th floor, I think, right? If I'm remembering it correctly.
Correct.
It's for Clint Hill to have that guilt, I guess what I'm saying is he shouldn't, even though I know why he does, because it is the job that they take and the oath that they take and the responsibility that they feel. But it was remarkably easy in a sick way for that whole thing to happen.
He had eventually become the agent in charge of the White House Protective Detail later, and then an assistant director of the Secret Service, but he ultimately retired because of what he called deep depression and recurring memories of the assassination. Some of you will recall a film made in 1993 called In the Line of Fire. It's a Clint Eastwood thriller movie about a former Secret Service agent, and that agent, that role was in part based on the Clint Hill role. The character that Clint Eastwood plays is also similarly scarred by the JFK assassination. He was there on that occasion. Hill grew up in Washburn, North Dakota, attended Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota.
I never knew that.
That's it. Served in the Army. He was a railroad agent and then joined the Secret Service in 1958. He'd been in Denver for a while, and then he joined the group that was assigned to protect the president and the first family as well. A couple more thoughts. Let's stay on schedule. A couple more thoughts on this particular story and the fateful day in question, November 22, 1963, and Hill's place in it, because he ends up being prominent in a number of different situations after the assassination indeed took place. Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line is open. That is 64686. Back with more in just a minute here in the fan. Nick Halter of Axios joins us at about 4:30 with some interesting thoughts he's put together on a potential site for a new Minnesota Timberwolves arena. This is all based on, obviously, the fact that the new ownership, the winning ownership, according to the arbitrators, goes forward and gets approved by the National Basketball Association. I didn't get into this with Johnny, and I probably should have. Can we assume that because to this point we've not really heard anything new public from Glenn Taylor, that there is no intent to try to, contest the ruling, that he's going to move on with the rest of his life, or is he just laying in the weeds?
I was going to say, or is he lying in wait?
Yeah, that's also possible.
Is he silent in a bunker somewhere waiting to strike?
I don't think you can ever rule that out with Glenn Taylor.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
but true. I think they feel like most systems are go here.
Yeah, we'll find out. I hope soon. Clint Hill, we just were lamenting his loss at the age of 93 years old, passed away last Friday. That news breaking over the weekend. The Secret Service agent who found himself then shortly after the third shot that killed John Fitzgerald Kennedy at the Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, on November 22, 1963. He gets on the back of the motorcade to try really to convince Jackie Kennedy to move back into the vehicle because she had seemingly acted like she was trying to either leave it or get the Hill's attention, whatever the case may be. Hill has said, and part of the reason I think he's become such a big part of history is his detail, his memory from that day on a number of fronts. And he noted that the third rifle shot, it was the sound of something hard hitting something hollow, is the way that Clint Hill later indeed put it. He notes remembering Jackie Kennedy climbing on the trunk towards him. What is she doing? What is she doing? He thought, good God, she's going to go flying off the back of the car. He remembered seeing her eyes filled with terror, and then it dawned on him. She was reaching for a piece of her husband's head, as we mentioned earlier as well. He mentions also, or he has over a period, talking about this over a period of, many, many years. He's the agent who shields the two with his body. And when the limo arrives at Parkland Hospital, he talks about the chaos that ensues. He thought that he instinctively figured out that Jackie did not want anyone to see the president's terrible head wound. I took off my suit coat, placed it over his head and upper torso, he wrote in his book, at which point she then released her grip. UPI correspondent, that's United Press International for the kids who don't know, Merriman Smith, who indeed had let the world know of the shooting minutes earlier with the first bulletin at 12:34 p.m. Central Standard Time, found Hill at the hospital and said, how badly was he hit, Clint? And Hill replied curtly, he's dead. That's what Smith wrote in his November 23, 1963 eyewitness account. Then Hill sets up a direct phone exchange to the hospital to Washington. He takes a call from who? The Attorney General of the United States, Robert Kennedy. And Bobby Kennedy says, how bad is it? Hill doesn't want to say what he knows is true in a direct way. So he simply says, it's as bad as it gets. Worth noting that in 1964, the Treasury Department bestowed upon him their highest award for bravery. I didn't deserve an award. He wrote of his thoughts at the time. The president is dead. I just get up in the morning and drink. I didn't do anything. Friends would come to see me and I wouldn't even respond to them, he said in a recent ESPN interview. We played the sound from 1975, 60 Minutes. In that particular interview, since then, that interview, Hill has said many times that as tough as it was to do it, that it was instrumental to him getting to a better place. In fact, he wrote eventually a letter to Mike Wallace saying, my interview with you on 60 Minutes in 75 turned into much more of an emotional experience than I thought possible. I didn't realize that I was in as much emotional distress as I obviously was. It did turn out to be a cathartic experience for me and helped me release feelings that had been pent up in me for a long time ago. 1990, he takes a trip back with his wife to Dallas. For about 2 hours, he simply walked the aforementioned Dealey Plaza, looked at every angle, every possibility, let everything run through my mind that I could think of that happened that day. And finally, I came to the realization that I did the best I could do, that I really didn't have a chance of doing anything other than what I did do. This is in a Star Tribune story regarding a trip he made back to Bismarck and a speech he gave on that occasion. Emotionally, it was extremely difficult, and I just put it out of my mind, kept my focus on what had to be done that day. We really didn't have time to think about our own grief. We never received any counseling. and we never discussed it, which is interesting. You think counseling would be automatic in that situation, but I guess you have to be ready for that as well.
Different time, too.
That's also true.
The 60s and 70s.
You're right. Conspiracy theories. He was asked about them all the time, whether he believed Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Quote, there were only 3 shots that were fired on November 22, 1963, only 3. They all came from the same location, the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. They were all fired from the same rifle. That rifle was fired by one individual who acted alone, and his name was Lee Harvey Oswald. So his place, like I said, is permanent in history, his connection to that day, because I don't even remember. I'm sure other Secret Service agents have spoken at one point or another, but I don't know that I remember any of those. And certainly no one being as public as he was. And then I think the story then got a whole new life when when the Eastwood film came out in 93, which is not just about that, but it is a tentacle about a Secret Service agent who was working on that occasion and how haunted he was by what he did not do. And that, I think, sort of gave that story a whole new life, and to a certain extent, Clint Hill a whole new life as well, a combination of things. I mentioned it's not just Ode for Dead Guy Day, it's Ode for Dead Gal Day. We'll have that for a little later, perhaps in the 5 o'clock hour of the broadcast, maybe after the top 5 at 5. A lot of texts have come in via the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line, 64686, about what to do, how to fix your Minnesota Timberwolves, if they are fixable at this point, and about several other subjects as well. So we'll try to ease those in to the discussion today before we wrap things up at 6:30. But I am going to talk arena and the possibility of an interesting site for a new arena, as offered up by our next guest, Nick Halter, who these days writes for Axios and Axios.com. And he laid out an interesting scenario about a piece of land that you and I both know, I think, pretty well in downtown Minneapolis, and whether it might be the ideal place if indeed a new arena is going to be built on behalf of A-Rod and Mark Laurie, the prospective new owners of the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we'll get to him on that and maybe a couple of other items with Nick, and prepare as well for the top 5 at 5, usual time. Guardsy and I back together, and it's quite emotional. Our next guest wrote earlier today via Axios.com, if Alex Rodriguez and Mark Laurie are serious about building a new basketball arena, picking a high-profile site in the middle of downtown could be a huge win. Nick Halter, kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. Welcome back to the program. For those who have not read the piece that you lay out in a great deal of detail, give us your inspiration and where specifically this site is located.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I have been kind of reporting on the downtown commercial real estate market for a while, and what you're seeing is these office properties trading at prices that are just kind of jaw-droppingly low. And I'll give an example of the Ameriprise Financial Tower in downtown, sold for $200 million 7 years ago. It just sold for $6 million. So you're seeing some major corrections happening in this market. And so I had been following kind of where the Wolves might build an arena for a while, and I thought, well, you know, a lot of the previous stadium ideas had been on the fringes of downtown near the farmers market, which made sense before because that's where you could find some cheap land. But with what's happening now, I think it might be time to start thinking about looking at something in the middle of downtown that would maybe help kind of revive downtown. And
that location is basically 33 South 6th Street, right? City Center. And that includes a Marriott hotel, our 4th tallest tower. Basically, this footprint stretches from Nicollet Mall to Hennepin Avenue. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a huge complex. It's the tower that people who are sitting at Target Field see. It's kind of the big, ugly, brutalist tower that blocks a lot of the other nice-looking ones. And yes, the tower is 52 stories, and it had been the home to Target for a long time. And just a few years ago, they left the tower and consolidated their employees to a couple of buildings nearby, which means it's like mostly dark now. There's a couple of other smaller tenants in there, but as their lease kind of runs out, they're still paying money on it. The value of this tower is just going to keep going down and down and down. And then on the ground floor, people probably know some of the bars and restaurants, Tom's Watch Bar, FEMA's, Fogo de Chão,
right,
and some of the Skyler restaurants too.
So the idea here in your mind is, and you talk, and we'll get to this in a bit, there are some hurdles potentially to putting this sort of thing together. But what you lay out, I would think, would certainly interest business leaders, the mayor, as you lay out, talking about the possibility that an arena with an entrance on Nicollet Mall and another on Hennepin, which would bring much needed evening and weekend foot traffic to a downtown core that has long been too dependent on office workers. Imagine a Wolves or Lynx playoff game with fans bar hopping on a pedestrian-only Nicollet Mall where open containers are allowed, as Mayor Jacob Fry proposed. And you're saying, look, the price would have been prohibitive at one point, but because of the way the landscape has changed here, it might not be anywhere near as absurd a notion as it was, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Exactly. I mean, huge discounted prices. And the complication here comes within, buying out people out of their leases, relocating them,
sure,
tearing their buildings down, that type of a thing. But if the kind of shiny object at the end of this is that you now have a sort of activated Nicollet Mall where it's not just Monday, or it's not even Monday through Friday anymore. It's Tuesday through Thursday that people are in the office. And then how do you run a restaurant on Nicollet Mall when your clientele is only coming down for 3 lunches a week? Well, now you got 41 Wolves games,
yep,
you got 20 Lynx games, you got concerts, Disney on Ice, just things bringing people down there on the weekends and nights. I think that would be a big game changer.
And Target, so they're out of here. They don't operate in this complex anymore, correct?
They don't. They still, the people that work in that building are still assigned to downtown.
Mm-hmm.
They're just in these other towers. They have just a couple blocks south on the mall. They don't need as much space, and that's what's happening is that companies aren't leaving downtown. They're just saying, well, if we had this much space, we can cut it in half because
sure,
we're not in here that much. And so that's created a 10 million vacant square feet of office space in downtown Minneapolis. And so trying to refill this tower with a million square feet is just, it's not really going to happen anytime soon. You
write also, Ameriprise Financial was the sole tenant in the 960,000 square foot Ameriprise Finance Center. Then in 2022, they decide to consolidate workers to a building it owns nearby, and the building just sold for $6.25 million, or as you lay out, a 97% discount from its 2016 sale price of $200 million. That's just 8-9 years ago. It's crazy.
Yeah, you're basically giving it away at that point. And I mean, if you look at the building, this Ameriprise Financial Center, it's a nice building. It was only built in 2000. It's a classy, good-looking building, but the amount of money you have to invest in these things to sort of outfit them for new tenants, you have to build, fitness centers and lounges, and you have to build out offices inside of them for new companies to come in. It's something that people don't really want to do, and that's why I'm hearing more and more real estate people talking about the idea of tearing down towers instead of trying to retrofit them.
So have you gotten in any of the reporting you've done, A-Rod made it very clear in this very studio, actually, when he joined us last summer, that they're going to want a new arena, and it's going to be privately financed. Now, we never got into the fine print at all about what does privately financed mean. What do you expect to get in return from either the city or the state? Have you gotten any hints of where they might be thinking, and if they have expressed any interest in the areas that you're talking about here?
Well, Johnny Athletic reported before that they had been looking at the farmers market site, which makes a lot of sense. But the problem with the farmers market site is that it's sort of surrounded by freeways, and you'd have to you can't really get to the North Loop or downtown easily from it. So there's some drawbacks to that site. As far as I know, they haven't looked at the core of downtown. I did a lot of vetting on this when I had this idea. I called a lot of people who would, sort of will be players in this whole thing as it unfolds, and none of them had really thought of that, but almost all of them were intrigued by it. Some of them just straight up said they loved the idea. they haven't vetted it themselves fully yet, because there's a lot more that goes into it than just that's a good site. I mean, there are some drawbacks to it. It's a small site.
Yeah.
I know the big thing they want with Target centers, they want a bigger site where they can have more of an entertainment district. And that makes a lot of sense. There are some possibilities for doing that here, because they also have their practice facility at a building that is in between where I'm talking about now and then where their current arena is. It's Mayo Clinic Square. They practice in there. You could sort of make that an extension of the arena, and then tear down Target Center and make that like the Wolves entertainment district, where you'd have maybe hotels or restaurants or offices or residential, that type of thing.
Matt in Rosemount has texted in, and he's pushing back in a couple of fronts with a couple of issues that I think would be good for you to address. He writes today, I worked in 33 South 6th for years, 22nd floor to be exact. There is no way the footprint is large enough to hold an NBA arena. Target employees are no longer there. He also asks, how would this benefit bars and restaurants any more than Target Center's current location does in that regard? So what distinctions would you draw in that regard? And you've already sort of alluded to the footprint issue. Could it well be that they will view that as, despite how good an idea this seems on several levels, as a non-starter?
Yeah, so the site that I'm talking about, City Center, if you add in not just the tower, but the retail complex, the parking, the hotel, that's 4.75 acres. The current City Center is on about 3.4 acres. So it's bigger. It's about, 3% bigger, something like that. So it is bigger, but I agree with his larger point, which is that if they want to do something massive, this would not be the site. I'm raising the idea that there might be other sites here in downtown that you could start looking at as well. Mm-hmm. That would be that. In terms of like the restaurant business and stuff, if you kind of look at what Wolves fans do, a lot of them park in those ABC ramps and go straight into the arena and back out afterwards. Yep. You could still park in those ramps, and you could probably still take Skyways over, but you could now have people coming in from the other side of downtown where it's Nicollet Mall. You could have built up more in the middle of the city again. So I don't think people, if you go to Nicollet Mall before a Wolves game, you don't see as many people down there as you do on the other side of downtown.
Yeah, it's a good point. You also mentioned in the piece you wrote some of the challenges that you acknowledge also beyond just the footprint site is the fact that you got the separately owned full-service Marriott hotel that was renovated in a major way, I think, in 2020, assessed at $59 million. How does that complication fit in?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, the other issue here is Minneapolis hotel occupancies are the lowest in the country right now. They're like 50%. There's probably a case made that we have too many hotels right now in downtown Minneapolis too. But I talked to one kind of real estate expert who wasn't involved with this, but his idea was, well, you could just give the Marriott air rights to your arena. You could build them a hotel on top of your arena as like a relocation type of thing.
So when the obvious question is going forward, no matter where they end up trying to build a new arena, is what they expect to get from either the city, the metro any like Metro Council or the state in return. Even though they're saying it's going to be privately financed, the assumption is they might have some. They might be looking for some tax breaks, etc. Do you have any sense of what the city and or state might be willing to do, if anything, in that regard? Or are we at a point where literally places, especially like here, are so suspicious of that whole deal, they're saying, we ain't going to give you a dime. This is all, you're going to have to do this start to finish. What do you think?
Well, if you look back at when the soccer team wanted to build their stadium in Minneapolis, the then Mayor Betsy Hodges didn't want to do a deal with them that would basically have given them property tax exemption. So you wouldn't have to pay property taxes on your stadium. That's pretty much standard for most of these arenas and stadiums in the country. Well, they ended up leaving and going to St. Paul instead, but the current mayor, Jacob Fry, criticized her for that. And so I think, between the lines, he'd be on board with like that idea of giving them property tax exemptions. Now, it's a pretty progressive city council, and that's where I'd have questions about whether or not they would want to, be giving any kind of breaks to a billionaire or billionaires for this kind of a thing. The other thing that I think, and I'm not going to weigh in on who should do what or not, but you could see a deal where if they gave them the old Target Center site as some kind of development opportunity as a flip, making, and then you could build up a tax base on that property over time, because you don't want to just leave that big empty lot there after you tear down Target Center.
No, I would think not. You mentioned, so our hotel occupancy is the lowest in the country of any metro area. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
What's that about?
We do well in the summers, but we haven't rebounded the same way as other cities have post-pandemic.
This is all still post-pandemic stuff. We've not. What makes us different in that regard? Any theories on why?
I think a few things. I mean, one is that we actually had a hotel boom that happened right before the pandemic hit. So, we probably had built out too many rooms in the first place. So, it's kind of then when you just see, and then I think the other big thing here is corporate travel hasn't come back. And for our downtown, where Target hasn't brought people back into the office in any meaningful way, a lot of people flew in to do business with Target, and when they're not in the office, I think a lot of that is missing still. But there could be bigger problems there too. I don't know fully what's going on with it.
A couple more texts have come in. This is from Dan, Minnesota. Wait a second. Who owns Target Center in the land? Does Glenn own it, or does the city state? Just wondering, because I feel like that would affect them being able to turn that into an entertainment district. Sorry, he writes, if that's a dumb question.
No, that's a good question. The city owns it, and that's not always the case. There are places where the teams own stadiums, but the city does own that land and the stadium.
Do you think there's any chance that they would end up entertaining, they being, Mark Lowry and A-Rod, if this goes through and they get approved by the NBA Board of Governors, that they would entertain leaving the city entirely?
I think with Detroit moving into the Pistons moving to downtown Detroit, I think every NBA team now is in a city. So if it's a question of would they go to the suburbs, I'd have a hard time seeing that, just because the NBA seems to be an urban league that wants to have, downtown arenas. The question of would they leave the Twin Cities is one way above my pay grade. But,
sure.
But also it does seem like the NBA is more interested in expansion than relocation.
Did you get any, since you wrote the piece I think was posted this morning, did you get any, what kind of reaction have you gotten, either privately maybe from people affiliated with the Wolves or from the business community? Any interesting responses?
Not really from the Wolves, but I got a lot from real estate people downtown, and all of them really like the idea. But all of them acknowledge, like I do, there are kinks that could come up that I don't know what they are. So there's engineering questions to be had. So I'm not presenting this as this is the only, this is a sure thing. It's just something I think is worth exploring. And even if it's not this site, like I said, there's more land now in downtown that should be in play. There's still parking lots. There's still other older buildings that could make sense if you kind of cobble some land together. And
this gets all back to how much the prices have come down regarding these huge pieces of real estate, right? That's the issue. That's why you're saying it's once upon a time it would have been clearly impractical. Now maybe not so much.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think the city, if they have some power in this, should also be thinking that the same way, which is, this is the area that needs it. We don't need to be trying to expand the downtown footprint out towards, up past Target Field, basically. The middle of the downtown is what needs it the most. I
appreciate the time, sir. Interesting piece, good fodder, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks as always, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. That is Nick Halter. Writes for Axios, runs Axios local these days, and had a very interesting piece. If you've not read it, maybe we can post it, or I'll retweet the link that Guardsy sent to me, because I had not seen it earlier today. He brought it to my attention, and it does throw in. Look, there's a lot of hurdles in this particular spot, but I think it's a good piece to get people thinking in a different direction. I think that's a lot of what Halter's intent was here, as he just said, is, all right, maybe this is an impractical spot. Maybe this footprint isn't big enough, but that there are, for creative minds, there are some interesting possibilities that, because of the real estate market basically imploding to the degree that it has, might open the door to several locations. All of them having hurdles, because many of them they have buildings on there, or even businesses, or in the case of this one location, the Marriott, for example, but renovated Marriott not that long ago. But I do think it's worth pursuing because we're in a different time. And, I'm assuming if you're A-Rod and Lori, you're looking for creativity, right? You're looking for ideas where maybe you bring the city along, perhaps because this mayor is going to be a little bit more receptive to helping out in certain ways if he can be convinced that this can open some other things up in a downtown location that's relatively underserved.
You know what, in 2025, Dan, we call what Nick Halter did today?
Collaborative?
It's a thought exercise.
Is that what they call it now?
It's a thought exercise. I think so. That's probably a dated term, but you know me, we're years past the collaboration and alignment and intentionality, but I do like that let's start thinking about it, and let's start thinking about it in a different way. And I thought it was interesting that he said he talked to some people who are going to be players in this thing, and they thought, we never thought of that. That's interesting. That's a good way to think about it. Because whenever we go do the show from the cage, I usually go get some coffee at Cardigan Donuts just across the Skyway, in that city center. Right. And obviously you lived downtown, you worked downtown for a long time. I remember I think my dad's office was in the city center back in the day, or at least close by. I remember what it was back in the heyday, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, whenever it was. It ain't that anymore. For people, like I always say with Williams Arena, have you been there lately? If you go to City Center now, it's crazy. What's not there, the lack of activity, and there's obviously places that are hanging on and still good tenants there, obviously. But because of how much stuff has changed for a million different reasons, that does make a lot of sense to try to find some buildings or some lots of land that aren't being used and try to develop those for something like this.
Yeah. Well,
so I like the thought exercise.
Yeah, I think it at least opens some eyes and it opens the door to some of these possibilities. And look, there's not any question they want a new one, right?
Yes. Yep.
How that's going to play out, they may already have a bunch of ideas. My guess is they do. How much of them are workable, I don't know yet, but they've had plenty of time to think about this stuff. And I don't think I don't think there's any reason to believe they're going to work slow. I think they're going to work big and rather ambitious. And
Lori's trying to build his own city, Tolosa.
Yeah. What's the latest? I have not heard much on that.
I haven't heard much. I think he's focusing on Wonder, his other entity. But that's how these guys think. Certainly Lori, right? They do think big, and they do think bold, and they do think differently, probably. So I think aggressive is the right word for it.
This is Ed in St. Paul. The Pioneer Press reported that the east side of the Mall of America was a potential arena site. I had not heard that one. Have you read that story?
Well, there's two things. Well, one thing.
Yeah.
I guess one question. Is it the Pioneer Press or is it Charlie Walters in the Pioneer Press?
That's a good question.
And that's not a criticism.
But
I'm just saying things get thrown out.
Yes, they do.
That may or may not be true.
Often are just amused.
Or something that was overheard at Mancini's or Dunker's or something like that. So that's, I think, an important distinction.
Yes, it is.
Is it reported
historically,
or was it just a thought? Hey, some people think the Mall of America site, where they used to have concerts back in the day. Do you remember that? They always do something in that east parking lot.
I don't remember that.
They used to do. I saw James Taylor there. They had a whole concert series in the 90s. I think they put a Cirque du Soleil show in that parking lot. There's plenty of spots there. So we've always been trying to develop that part of Mall of America. I hadn't heard the stadium specifically. Or the arena specifically.
Would the Wolves consider building a facility in Arden Hills like the Vikings have built in Egan? That's
who is going to be the Arlington Heights / Arden Hills leverage play?
That's a good question.
Because there's going to be somebody.
Somebody's going to have to get used.
So who's going to be that city?
Apple Valley?
Well, they're still digging out of the snowstorm from 2 years ago. They're not ready for this.
Yeah. That's a good point. Dan, sorry if this is a dumb question, but what is wrong with Target Center? It's already downtown. It's not a dumb question. It does seem illogical to say we need another one. But look, you're not, it's an insane proposition under the old rules, which is having a state, city help out basically to build it and to spend the money to build it. But it's no longer insane with the relatively new model, which we've seen play out in a number of cities in which they have been largely privately funded, that there's not even an attempt to try to hold up a town or to say, well, we got to get 50-50 on this sort of thing. There's only one team in town that could pull that off with a straight face, and that's the Vikings. They already did it. Right?
And they had Pat Kessler also doing a lot of their heavy
their water
lifting.
for sure.
Yes.
For a number of years.
Yep.
That part's true, too. So I'm not a great economic mind, so I don't understand how this works when you say privately funded and how owners make money on those kinds of deals. But obviously, wasn't the one in San Francisco, is that Pinnacle? What's that called? The one that Golden State plays in?
The Chase Center
Oracle?
now? It was the Oracle.
Oh, now it's a Chase. Okay,
I think it's the Chase Center now.
That was privately funded, right?
I don't know for sure, but I would think yes.
Now I think like the cheapest ticket price for an average game is like $800.
Yes.
So maybe that's how the owners have made it up, being in charge of the financing.
Right.
But I assume it's complicated. It has to do with sponsorships, and there's got to be a lot of ways that they find a way to make money.
Intuit Dome, with your guy Steve Ballmer, the Clippers' new place, he paid for that, if I remember correctly.
So Charlie Walters is an early adopter of thought exercise. Yes, that's a good way to put it.
He may have cornered the market on it.
That's a very, very good
and
way.
some of it comes true, but he does do a good job of getting the conversation going.
Gargi, didn't you go to the giant inflatable fest meat grinder in the East MOA lot? And by the way, some of us call that the Met Center lot. I have no recollection of this stuff.
Well, I thought IKEA was the Met Center lot.
Oh, yeah.
I thought IKEA was where Met Center was.
Yeah, technically, I think you're right, but I think that's true.
I could be wrong, but the inflatable thing, no. Like the Big Bounce America thing, I don't remember that.
I don't have any recollection of any of this, man. My memory is just
They had a whole concert series there, like 95, 96. I remember being in middle school and going.
Hey, and we don't want a new X, but don't we want a bunch of change, like remodeling there too?
Yeah, including maybe a hotel connected to it.
And where's the money on that?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
But Bettman went to bat for us when he was in town a few weeks ago. Yeah, saying that we need to get it done.
Well, but I mean, I still don't know where you're going to get
St. Paul, Melvin Carter. Come on down.
Yeah, if they have the finances.
Teams
to do
moved. We've lost a team before.
I guess that's
We've
true.
lost even the state of hockey has lost a hockey team before.
Top 5 at 5 will include
a little bit of Wolves. What was your favorite tush push moment? And I know you covered this on Sunday sermons. What was your favorite Ishbia brother, speaking of owners, buying the Twins? And what does AJ Pierzynski think about the new developments?
The world is facing urgent, monumental issues, and your students may be considering a career where they can make a global impact, even if they don't know where to begin. In the heart of Washington, D.C., students gain world-renowned expert knowledge and a global network as they pursue a master's degree and turn their passions into practice. Thousands of the world's leaders discovered what they're truly capable of at the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs, and you can help them find it.